Hello and welcome to the Consistency Project with E.C. Synkowski. My name is Patrick Cummings, and every episode I have the distinct privilege of presenting EC with a question on subject matters that range from nutrition to fitness to the choices we can all make to live a healthier, more functional life. By exploring both the principles at play and the actions worth carrying out as a result, we aim to get you thinking, get you moving, and get you taking more consistent steps toward optimizing your well-being. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. How are you, EC?
Good. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Today we're going to, as we often do, maybe we should do an episode with it has nothing to do with your Instagram, but we are going back to your Instagram for a conversation on why diets fail. And we're going to talk about something that you wrote on that graphic. As you lose weight, the process gets harder, not easier, and all other factors being equal, smaller bodies need fewer calories. That's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, you have another masterclass coming out soon, correct?
Yeah. I mean, basically top of the new year means new diet, right?
Yeah,
January
right.
2021. So
everything starts on January 1st.
That's right. That's right. And in fact, I'm going to give you a couple extra days because we're going to kick off the 8-week program Sunday, January 3rd for the next kind of cohort. And it's great. You know, it's an 8-week program that a group of people are going through. So you have that kind of group accountability, motivation, and we go through doing the 800-gram challenge. We go through lazy macros. We go through macros and then kind of choosing your own adventure so that you can really understand your diet and finally get the results that you want and not be so lost out there with all the different nutrition information.
And so two things about it. One, you go through this with folks, right? So it's not as if you're sign up and then we're not going to pay attention to you anymore. But in fact, you're going to be there for questions. You're going to be there for a little bit extra guidance, correct?
Yep. We've got a private Facebook group and I'm in there every day and I go live almost once a week throughout the 8 weeks. Yep.
And then last question, who's the right person for the masterclass? Is it, we want nutritionists in there, or is it anybody and everybody who wants to get a handle on their nutrition, their diet, it's appropriate for them? I
certainly think it's good for health coaches or gym owners. I've had them do it for sure, as they often are at the front lines of nutrition. In terms of direct users, I think people that are frustrated, right? The ones that have done X different things, the ones that are sick of kind of trying many things that aren't working. This is definitely for you, for sure.
Cool. Okay. So folks can check the show notes. We'll put the link in there, but it's optimizemenutrition.com/masterclass. And if they use the code consistency, they get a special prize.
Yes.
I don't know. EC shows up at your door and gives you a hug. I'm not sure what happens.
You get a discount.
With the code.
You get a discount.
Okay, cool. All right. So let's dive into this conversation about why diets fail. And one of the things I failed to read at the start there from the original Instagram challenges. This also means going back to your quote unquote old ways after a diet will 100% result in weight regain. So maybe we start there, or maybe you give us kind of whatever context we need to understand to get into this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to focus on, why weight loss is so hard and why weight loss maintenance is so hard. There's so many different statistics out there on how much diets fail, particularly in the long term. You'll hear things like 80% of people can't keep off the weight lost for a year, let alone 2 or 3 years later. And this is a big problem, right? I mean, we've talked about how weight is related to health. And so we need people to fix this. We're not just concerned with people losing weight today in the next 6 weeks, a year. We want them to keep it off too if we really want to have any health improvements. And this is, I think, how we have to really frame the discussion. Dieting is not a 2 months and done thing. And when we look at it that way, I think it's really doing a disservice to people. And certainly we've talked about sustainability, consistency on this podcast before, but I want to talk a little bit more about, physiologically why this process is so hard.
Mm-hmm. Is part of the problem just the term diet? Have we just, I feel like we talked about it before, like words that get kind of co-opted for one thing when it's meant to be another thing, and now it confuses folks. It just feels to me like just using the word diet, what it's culturally come to mean is there's a short period of time where you're going to do this thing and it's going to solve all your problems, and then life can go back to normal after that. Whereas diet on a larger, that encapsulate everything you eat forever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I typically use the word diet to mean that your latter example in that. Yeah. What is your diet? And I prefer that, right? Only because of the same reason that when we take this view of it's a short-term thing, we've already lost. We've already lost. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So in prep for this, you sent me over the 3 main issues for weight loss process and maintenance. So I'm going to give those three, and then we'll dive into maybe each one of those, kind of give us a sense of what they mean.
Yeah.
So the three things. The first one, the number of calories for maintenance, not just losing, after weight loss is less than where you started.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, things get harder as you progress. And number three, your appetite might not change even though your weight has.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do that first one first.
Yeah.
The number of calories for maintenance, not just losing, after weight loss is less than where you started.
Yeah. What that really is saying is that the change is forever. The change is forever. I talk about decreasing calories to lose weight. And built into that is the implicit understanding that all other factors being equal, as the Instagram post said, smaller bodies need fewer calories. And so if I'm 180 pounds and I want to be 170 pounds, I need to eat fewer calories to be at 170 pounds. And to stay at 170 pounds, I will never again eat the calories I did at 180, And why? You have less tissues to support is a big one, right? You don't have as many cells. Less cells, either in number or size, less nutrients needed to support their function. I mean, even just looking at fat cells, for example, when you lose weight, those cells shrink in size. And so there's less amount of fat in the cell. There's less amount of calories in the cell, right? The other reason, though, that I think people forget about too is smaller bodies burn less calories in movement. Every time I take a step at 170 pounds, I burn less calories than when I was 180. Why? I'm not carrying around those 10 extra pounds, right? The stress on the musculature to produce the force to propel that extra weight around. And of course, it doesn't sound like a lot when you just talk about it as 10 pounds in the absolute sense, but that's going to build up a lot and add up a lot over time across the entire day. It's like walking around the entire day with a 10-pound weight vest on, right? And so that there in that notion, when somebody goes about doing a diet, they think about it as, I'm doing it for 2 months and I'm done. No. You do the diet, and if you want to maintain the results, you do the diet forever. And this is one of the reasons that we see that weight regain is that I think people think they can go back to their old ways because they've seen the results. But the results are only there because you've totally changed, and that's what you need to maintain. That's your new normal.
Yeah. I think about something, I think about it because I'm in the midst of reading it. There's a book by Scott Adams. He created the Dilbert.
Yeah, I know him, yeah.
Comic strip. It's a book that came out a while ago, but a big part of the book, and I think one of the things that people respond to really well in it, is his point about systems being better than goals. And I think about that here. In other words, your goal could be, I want to lose 10 pounds, but the system is, I eat 800 grams of fruit and veggie every day, plus, et cetera, protein and
exactly.
Basically the consistency project, right? The consistency project, that tracker, that's a system. Whereas I want to lose 15 pounds for my wedding, that's a goal. Listening to you, it made me think of that because that to me is where I think back to my original question or my first question, which is culturally, this idea of a diet is almost synonymous with a goal. Okay, you're on a diet. What's your goal? I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to lose 15 pounds. My high school reunion, whatever. Whereas if we can flip that and reverse that and let the diet be the system or be, your system is the specific diet you adhere to, at least it feels like that's a better way to think about it.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, the system becomes how you keep the habit in place, right?
Yep,
and that's exactly what you need for sure.
Issue number 2, things get harder as you progress. How annoying is that?
Yeah. I mean, this is unlike, we talked about this actually in the It's Okay to Be Hungry podcast, how, dieting sometimes requires less work where other things require more work. And dieting here as well is different than other endeavors where generally in your job, in a relationship, things get easier with experience. Not so with weight loss. Yeah. And there's really 2 reasons for that. The first one was a deficit for you becomes your maintenance level of calories. And this causes those dreaded plateaus that we have in weight loss. So if I'm at 180 and I were to create a deficit to lose weight, maybe I start losing weight and I get to 175. Maybe that deficit that I created at 180 was really my maintenance calories for 175. That's why I hit a plateau. And so if to get down now to 170, which is where I want to go, I'm going to need to introduce a greater deficit. And this is really frustrating, as I mentioned, with those plateaus, because you're doing the diet for several weeks, you're sticking to it really well, and then all of a sudden you get stuck. You maybe only lose 5 pounds out of the 10. And it makes sense from what I told you kind of in the first part of this podcast, and that the smaller body needs fewer calories, right? And so it means that I need to create another deficit. You don't get to stick to the same intake for the whole time. And so that's hard because you've already made some sacrifices, right? You've already sort of restricted your diet. You're kind of humming along, and guess what? You need to restrict further. Concurrent to this, we have to point out the fact that this isn't just sort of a math game, that the body is also adapting during this process. And the body is very adaptable. We've touched on this before, and it's much more adaptable than really our understanding and my description of it. But an example of this, when I say like the math doesn't work out, is, suppose that I were to say, okay, I'm going to create a deficit. I'm going to eat 300 calories fewer a day. Well, okay, there's 3,500 calories in a pound. That means that I'll lose a pound in about 11 days. According to the math, that's how it should work, should in quotes, but we don't always see this. The reason is those pesky genetics and what that does to our hormones. In the face of decreased intake, the body adapts. The body comes be more efficient in creating and using energy. Now, efficiency normally is a good thing. And again, in weight loss, it's reversed. It's actually not so good thing. What this means is that even though, let's say an apple has 100 calories, that maybe that 100 calories gave you the energy to walk around the block. When you are more efficient, now that 100 calories gives you the energy to get you around 5 blocks. And so if you're getting more energy, if the body's becoming more efficient in the weight loss process, from each food that you eat, each piece of food that you eat, you don't need as much food. Not good for that weight loss process.
Yep. Okay, cool. You said 2 reasons. What's the second?
So the second reason is this increased deficit that you kind of have to keep instilling on yourself or keep restricting yourself to is just the livability and the flexibility tightens. I kind of have described it before as your margin of error decreases. But, suppose in the same example that maybe I was eating 2,500 calories a day at 180 and I cut that down by 300 calories. So I was eating 2,200 calories a day, and that got me down to that 175 goal. And that, okay, I want to get to 170. So now I'm going to drop the calories by 300 again down to 1,900 calories a day. Now you could say, well, that's not getting more restrictive. I mean, you're just changing the number, you're just changing it by 300 again, right? Like smaller bodies need less calories. You shouldn't be as hungry. It's just another 300 calorie change that should kind of, in quotes again, be reflective of your new body weight. I would argue that's not it. And that as that total absolute number shrinks, as I go from 2,500 to 2,200 to 1,900, it's harder to achieve. In part because of this modern food environment, right? We have so much affluence of all of this processed food around us that has very high calorically dense foods, that it's very hard to fit what we consider social norms into a lower calorie budget, right? And so that's why, again, I like this budget analogy here for this, that, somebody who, let's say, is making $10,000 a month, they have it easier than somebody who's making $3,000 a month, even though, let's say, their living expenses might be 80% of their income, right? That person who's getting the $10,000 a month certainly has more flexibility in their choices of how, what's adding up to their expenses. And so this is why, when you have 50 pounds to lose, the first 10 to 20 are actually relatively easy compared to the last 5 or 10. And it ties into the concept that I talk about with my principle 10, that there are diminishing returns on attaining perfection, that this process becomes more difficult, more exacting, more painstaking the leaner you want to be.
Number 3 in our list of issues here, your appetite might not change even though your weight has.
Yeah. So part of what controls what and really how much you eat is hunger signaling and the hunger hormones associated with that. And there's actually a bunch of hormones involved with hunger. The big ones are leptin and ghrelin. Leptin is released by the fat cells. The more fat you have, the more leptin is released, which tells your brain, hey, you're not hungry. You've got enough storage. Ghrelin, produced mostly in the gut. This is known as the hunger hormone, which means it tells your brain you are hungry. And there's more hormones than this for sure. And these have been oversimplified for this. But, there's a question whether or not changes in these types of hormones change enough with weight loss. And there's some research, for example, that ghrelin, let's say, stays elevated. So you're more hungry even after a year of weight loss. So the person has achieved weight loss. Their body needs fewer energies for just energy needs, yet they might be hungrier than when they started the diet. That's not good. That's not good, especially for sustainability, right? And I think more important than looking at what these individuals' hormone levels are, like leptin and ghrelin, is more specifically clinically, how does the person rate their appetite overall? Do they actually not just have higher ghrelin, but do they actually say, or when they go down to sit down to eat, or when they go to eat, do they actually eat more? Are they more or less hungry? I kind of hinted at this already, but the body is operating at a level of complexity that is just orders of magnitude beyond our understanding and description of it. And so this is one of the reasons that I don't like explaining these exact physiological mechanisms like leptin and ghrelin, because there's so many different things occurring that I think when we start focusing on just leptin or ghrelin, we've kind of lost the big picture. But in these hormone studies, they actually did also check in with the person's clinical picture. What was their overall appetite when they sat down to eat? What's happening with the human in real time, for lack of a better word. And this person did feel more hungry, right? So we've got this diet where, they've lost the weight. They've kept it off, but they tend to be less satisfied. And we're going to talk about ways to control that. But overall, if we see that with dieting, and we do in some cases, not good. Not good to be sustainable. Not good if you're hungry.
So with all that, with those three issues, one of the things, and we sort of alluded to it at the start, and we've talked about it before, but a lot of that seems to me to come back down to at least recognizing that this process is a difficult one. And we've kind of maybe been led to believe that it's a short-term diet and it's fine. And then life goes back to, it's easy. And, whatever that might be, whatever that marketing message might be, part of it, what I'm hearing, what I'm taking away is just being much more honest about the fact that it's hard to start. And yes, and it continues to be hard.
Exactly. And I think we have to do that with clients. I think we have to do that with marketing, is we have to shoot people straight. I mean, to me, it's sort of like if you're climbing Mount Everest, they do a lot of checks and balances and preparation ahead of time to make sure you're actually going to get there, right? They don't just sort of say, anybody can do it. And I think that's sort of the perspective that we have to take with people that want to have significant weight loss. It's tell them that the process is hard, tell them that it gets more difficult. Maybe we won't get more people to do it. I don't know, but I'm sure that we'll cut down on the frustration. And I can only think that that's going to help with potentially more success overall. Better preparation going in, normally always translates to better results, right?
Yep. Okay, cool. So given everything we just talked about, given that recognition that we've got to be honest with ourselves, we've got to be honest with anybody who we work with, what do we do from there? How do we take that? How do we turn that into some action?
Yeah. We're listening to the Consistency Project.
It's true, yeah.
Which has that leaderboard that also includes some lifestyle factors. And I think this is where, the lifestyle factors really shine in our overall health picture, especially this weight loss and weight loss maintenance problem. And exercise is a key one here. And we're going to forget about the hunger hormones for a second. Exercise is so big because it increases our caloric need, right? And that happens not just in the activity that you do that day, not just you're going to burn more calories that day, but you also can increase your metabolic rate through muscle mass gain, which we talked about in the Increasing Muscle Mass podcast. So this would be the caveat. When I said that going down to 170, I could no longer eat the calories that I did at 180. This is going to be the caveat where I actually could. If at 170, I have a greater level of activity, if I have a greater percentage of muscle mass, I can eat more calories, right? I might be eating what I needed at 180 or maybe even more. And so exercise is really pivotal in making this kind of long-term change. And ultimately, this gets to kind of the question of, what kind of exercise should I do? Really focus on getting the steps in every day, resistance exercise, and no surprise, the answer is yes. Right? Calories today matter, how many calories burned today, and also increasing that muscle mass matters. So you're going to want to attack all different angles here. And the more that one type of exercise or one type of regime can really describe what you're doing, you probably should start looking at other things, right? If you only do walking, let's get some resistance exercise. If you only do resistance exercise, let's do more walking. But you get the idea. The other thing that I want to touch on with exercise, well, there's a couple other things because exercise is just so powerful. But I do think it's important not to hear that and walk away from that as, okay, well, exercise is this reward that I, quote, get to eat more now, right? Like I burned all these calories, let me eat more today, let me earn the donut or whatever it is. And instead think about it as it's closing the gap between your old diet and your new diet. It's not a reward. It's not letting you eat more per se, but now you have less of a change, and that new normal will not require quite as much sacrifice. There is some research to suggest that exercise does help regulate those hunger hormones that we touched on, leptin and ghrelin. But again, I don't really love chasing hormonal responses. I like looking what happens in real life, real time with people. And we find that continued exercise is one of the best predictors of weight loss maintenance. And this is really interesting too, that some of the effects of that are because exercise has positive psychosocial effects, that some of the stuff like emotional eating and mood are positively affected by exercise. And therefore, that's one of the reasons why weight loss is maintained. And so I think it's just really important to hammer this exercise piece, and that you should seriously question a diet or a lifestyle approach that doesn't encourage exercise. In my opinion, just walk away. It's not even valid.
Where does sleep come into that mix as well? I imagine it does.
Yeah. Yep. It's another factor on the Consistency Project. No surprise, sleep is important as well. Yeah. We tend to find that you are less hungry when you sleep enough. You tend to have more leptin, less ghrelin, if we're going to describe it that way. But again, if we look at it more of an appetite hunger scale, we find that you're better off when you sleep. And guess what else happens? You have the energy to exercise.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I'm sure we could talk for another hour about this, but diet, how does everything we've been talking about, how does that affect the diet? How should it affect the diet?
Yes, diet definitely affects it. Of course, in the Consistency Project, we got the 800-gram challenge, but we're also tracking protein. And this is where, we've kind of talked about that, yes, calories matter. Certainly caloric control matters, but also then how they're divided among the macronutrients matter. And protein is a key component here. Protein is routinely associated with better satiety, meaning people tend to feel more full when they have protein. And whether or not this really plays out with ghrelin and leptin, maybe not, but that's why it's better to look at that full clinical picture. People tend to be less hungry when they have more protein in their diet. So that's definitely something to include when we're looking at kind of long-term weight loss approaches. And of course, what else is interesting about protein is that it helps build that lean mass, right? So then we're back to this idea of, okay, let me burn more lean mass so my resting metabolic rate increases. So just sitting around the house, I burn more calories. So I'm further closing that gap between my old diet and what's my now new forever diet. And so we find that the Consistency Project factors are really synergistic, and that notion of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts is really true here as well.
Excellent. Okay. So we've been talking about why diets fail. Is there anything else as it relates to this conversation, this idea worth mentioning, maybe that I didn't ask or you want to make sure people know about?
I think maybe the one thing to touch on, to bring it back to consistency and sustainability is if you hear about a diet and you can't see yourself doing it past 3, 6, 1 year, turn around.
That's a great point.
Turn around, right? Like if it's something that you are going into thinking, well, I just have to do it for 7 days. I just have to do it for 3 weeks. That should be a red flag for you and you should walk away.
Yeah, that 1 year marker, that's legit. That's like, you got to really think about that.
Totally. Can you do it in 1 year? And then you're on to something.
Yeah, love that. All right, my friend. Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody out there for listening, for sending us your questions, for leaving ratings and reviews. And we will be back soon with another episode of The Consistency Project.